Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 424. Thank you for joining me today. Happy Friday. Hope you guys have had a good week. I had some technical difficulties getting started today. Finally got it figured out. So I'm ready to roll. We're going to pick up where we left off in the last podcast, and then hopefully we'll get through talking about this history of this Marxist and communist subversion that has been taking place in the United States. We've been talking about the history going back to the middle part of the 20th century, and we're going to get more into that today. But we've been talking about the crises of our third century, the United States third century, are the crises that we're in the middle of right now. And we've been relating it to the crisis of the third century that the Romans experienced that changed the Roman Empire forever. The Roman Empire became fragmented, and it was united again, and then fragmented, and united again, and then it became permanently fragmented. The capitals moved to the east, and the western part of the empire is taken over by the Goths. I mean, that's the history. So, I've been asking the question in light of, us celebrating our 250th, anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, not the 250th anniversary of the country, asking what are the issues that face us in our third century. And we've already identified first, the election crisis. If you didn't watch the president's speech last night, I mean, I don't know how I can lay out that we have an election crisis, more than I have in an episode that I did that was specifically focused on the election crisis. And then I did an episode that was focused on the education crisis. If you don't think we have an education crisis, I don't know what to do with you. You go back and watch that episode. All these are by design too. The election crisis, they don't want to fix the elections because it's by design. They're benefiting from the rigged elections. They're benefiting from the dumbed down populace. They're benefiting from the debt crises, which I did a podcast on the debt crisis, the treason crisis. All of this is related to treason, subversion, the fifth column, looking to take down the United States from within. The racial and tribalism crisis, did an entire episode on that. We're going to get back into that crisis in the next podcast. And then this is all related to the rise of Marxism, socialism, communism, whatever you want to call it. Did several podcasts on this. This is what we're going to continue talking about today. The rise of Marxism, socialism, that this is not just an accident. And there's more crises that we're going to add to this list that are coming, but we're going to sit here for a little bit and continue talking about the rise of Marxism, socialism, because again, this is all related to Marxism and socialism, the rise and the Marxist socialism subversion that has been taking place since the middle part of the, or even longer than that, since, the beginning part, of the 20th century, maybe even longer than that. So we're going to relate all that, back. We'll get back into that in this podcast, and we're going to get more into the racial tribalism. The reason that they're doing the racial tribalism and want us fighting with one another, because they don't want the people to focus on what these traitors are doing, what these traitors have done to our country. And what they have done is they've run up our debt to $40 trillion on purpose. I went into the housing crisis in the last podcast. Talked about, had shown you how the debt started to rise around 2000 with the taking us to the war on terrorism, allowing 9/11 to happen, running up the debt, cutting taxes, using the housing market to show the growth while you're running up the debt. Explained all that. Talked about the parallels that the Roman Empire experienced in their third century crisis, and some of the parallels that we're experiencing with our third century crisis, the assassinations of emperors. Look, it's a picture of Lincoln being assassinated by John Booth, but John Kennedy too, assassination. So we have assassinations. That's one of the crises that they were dealing with in the third century of the Roman Empire. We haven't had a lot of we had an assassination attempt on Donald Trump running for president. Assassination attempt while he was president. But John Kennedy was assassinated. Barbarian invasions and migrations, those are parallels. Civil wars, peasant rebellions, not yet, but political instability. I explained in the last podcast that I would say that our election crisis is political instability. Again, if you watch the president's speech last night, the election crisis is a political instability. Usurpers competing for power, debasement of currency. This is a parallel. This is absolutely a parallel. So, as I said, that I've been relating our third century crisis with the crisis of the third century that the Romans experienced that changed their country, their empire forever. And I've been asking the question, what does the future of the United States look like? How will we fare after our crisis of our third century and all the crises that we're dealing with right now? Also have been relating it to the statement that's attributed to Alexander Tyler, a Scottish judge and historian, that said that democracy is always temporary in nature, simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. And understand that we are not a democracy. We are a democratic republic. We elect our representatives who represent us democratically, but we are a constitutional republic. The DSA guys, if you listen to them, they want to get rid of the Electoral College. They want to get rid of the bicameral legislature and just go to the House of Representatives, get rid of the Senate. Those are all the things that take us towards democracy, direct democracy. So that's what they want. But this is what Tyler says here. Democracy is always temporary in nature. It simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. A democracy will continue to exist up until the time that voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts, largesse from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always vote for the candidate that promises the most goodies, the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result of that every democracy will finally collapse due to loose fiscal policy, which will always be followed by dictatorship. Dictatorship bondage is cycle from bondage to faith, from faith to courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to complacency, from complacency to apathy, from apathy to dependence, and from dependence to bondage. Like I've explained, this is the public treasury. This is the public treasury right here. 39.4, getting ready to be $39.5 trillion in debt, approaching $40 trillion in debt. And all of this debt was built over the last 26 years, and it was all built by these people. Not all. Donald Trump's included in that as well. Donald Trump hasn't slowed down the spending. It's kind of impossible to slow down the spending. He brought in Doge and all of that, and everybody fought him because nobody wants to deal with the political ramifications of dealing with the hard decisions that need to be dealt with now. It's always been kick the can down the road. And then, these people, they want it. They did this on purpose. Like I explained in the last podcast that they were predicting in 2000 that we were going to be completely debt free. This is a secret document. I've shown you the document before. This showed that we were going to be completely debt free in 10 years. And they set about to run up our debt to prevent that from happening. The traitors that I'm telling you about, people that are traitors that are subverting the country through subversion. They're not trying to take down the country with armies, like John Kennedy says, armies by day. They use guerrillas by night. It's the sneaky undermining. It's what subversion is, the undermining of a power or authority to establish a system or institution, a new power system or institution. This is the revolution, the subversion that these people have been responsible for. It happened under them, but it was set up long before them. Like I was explaining to you, this goes back to George Bush's grandfather. Even before him, he was explaining in the last podcast about the brothers that that the Bushes considered Bill Clinton part of their family. Barbara Bush says that Bill Clinton was her fourth son, that brother from another mother. I explained to you that they're playing a role, this heel, hero, antagonist, protagonist role where they're both working together, but they're set up. One's supposed to be the heel, one's supposed to be the hero, one's supposed to be the Democrat, one's supposed to be the Republican. They don't care about that. That's for you. That's for the people on the street and in the comment sections on social media fighting with one another about Democrat and Republicans. These guys don't care about that. They don't care about that. Democrat, Republican. That's not for them. That's for you. That's to divide you so they can get rid of, so they can get on with looting you. That's for you. So that's the whole game that they played. This whole hero, heel, hero, antagonist, protagonist, one Democrat, one Republican, come from the left, one come from the right. But in the end, just like, what's his name? Tragedy and Hope. Carroll Quigley, who was, Bill Clinton's professor at Georgetown University. He even gives a shout out to Carroll Quigley. I think that was in his acceptance speech in 92. Carroll Quigley, my professor at Georgetown University, who wrote in Tragedy and Hope that the two parties should be almost identical so they can pursue the same agenda from different areas. From different sides. And then the voters, this is what Carroll Quigley writes in Tragedy and Hope. I got to show it to you. Here it is right here. This is what Carroll Quigley says. Bill Clinton's professor at Georgetown University. The argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideals and policies, one perhaps from the right and the other from the left, is a foolish idea acceptable only to doctrinaire and academic thinkers. Instead, the two parties should be almost identical so that the American people can throw the rascals out. And when he writes this in Tragedy and Hope, throw the rascals out is in quotes. And so that means that this is what the voter is saying. So we're throwing the rascal out. The voters, the Bush voters are saying, well, we're throwing the Clinton rascal out, not knowing that the new rascal you're getting in Bush is the same rascal. They're brothers from another mother. Throw the rascals out is what the voters say at every election, without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy. You won't get any profound or extensive shifts in policy from Bill Clinton, to George Bush, you'll get, little things. You'll get, what do they call them? You'll get, wedge issues. Why wedge issues? Because wedge issues drive the wedge. They want to drive the wedge so you don't see what's going on. You'll get that stuff. You'll get, some policy differences around the edges. But what Carroll Quigley is saying here, you won't get any without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy. You won't get that. You won't get profound or extensive shifts in policies from the brothers because they're playing the heel hero, antagonist, protagonist. You didn't get any shifts and extensive shifts in policies from Bill Clinton to George Bush, from George Bush to Barack Obama, from Barack Obama to Joe Biden. And Joe Biden was there in the Senate helping them pass their agenda the whole time, except when he became Obama's vice president. No shifts in policy, like Carroll Quigley is saying. Carroll Quigley, Bill Clinton's professor at Georgetown, who he gives a shout out. I always got to say Jesuit Georgetown, who he gives a shout out, in his acceptance speech. All right. So we were talking about Yuri and watching this interview that he did with Yuri Bezmenov was the Russian defector that defected to the United States.
Oh.
Hold on here. So he defected to the United States in the 1970s, and he did this interview with G. Edward Griffin, and he says in this interview that that Western imperialists, Western corporations were propping up the USSR after the communist revolution, supplying them with arms, supplying them with grain and food, supplying them with all kinds of other things. And we started talking about these Western imperialists and why. And I was explaining to you that it's not only people that can be set up as the heel, antagonist, protagonist. Nations can be set up as the heel, antagonist, protagonist. And that's what they were doing with Russia. That's why they were conditioning. That's what the Cold War was all about. The funniest thing about the Cold War, the Red Scare, is how they would get students in school to hide under their desk when they would have air raids. You know, what is that about? What is hiding under your desk? And all across the nation, all across the United States, they would have kids hiding under their desk when they had air raids. Oh, the Russians are coming. Even into the 70s. I don't know when the movie with, what's the Patrick Swayze movie? Where the Russians are coming and they, all this is set up. The Russians were set up as the heel, as the antagonist to the protagonist, the hero, the great United States. They set it up. But as Yuri says, that most of the support, financial support that Russia was getting was coming from these Western imperialists, Western corporations that he was talking about. And that's what I was explaining. And we were talking about in the 1950s, the McCarthyism, which what they call it, these investigations that Joseph McCarthy was having, where he was saying, no, the Soviet, the USSR is not where the threat is coming from, is what, if you listen to what McCarthy was saying. McCarthy says that no, the threat is coming from here in the United States, not over there in Russia. So if McCarthy is right in the 1950s, and he was, you may not have liked his methods and his methods of interviews and going after these people that he called communists and communist sympathizers. Right here it says, he alleged that numerous communist and Soviet spies, sympathizers had infiltrated institutions, including United States federal government, military, universities, and film industry, Hollywood. This is what Joseph McCarthy said. Let me read that again. He alleged that numerous communist and Soviet spies and sympathizers had infiltrated institutions, including the United States federal government and military, universities, and Hollywood and film industry. As we say, he said the communists were in Hollywood, the communists were in the universities. Come on, people. Do you think, were the communists in Hollywood? Were the communists in the universities? Yes, the communists were in, how can anyone doubt that the communists were in Hollywood and the communists were in the universities? And if they're if he said they were in the universities and in Hollywood, and he was right about that, were they also in the military and in the government? Yes, they were in the military and the government. Yes, McCarthy. He was right. And they censored him. Who led the censor of Joseph McCarthy? Prescott Bush. I explained that in the last podcast, or 2 podcasts ago, that Prescott Bush, who was McCarthy's colleague, Senate colleague, they were both in the same party. Why is Prescott Bush organizing the censor of Joseph McCarthy when he's sniffing out the domestic threat of communist subversion? Why? Why would Prescott Bush, who is a Republican, just like McCarthy, so Prescott Bush wasn't at the forefront of the censor, but he organized Democrats to censor Joseph McCarthy. Joseph McCarthy was in his party. They're both Republicans. Why would Prescott Bush do that? Why would Prescott Bush do that? Who are these Western elite, these Western? So we know that I was getting into the Lend-Lease program. We know that, that was a program that was approved by Congress, and we gave Russia, the USSR, tons of weapons, tons of food, we're going to get into that in a moment. We know that happened. But what was that about? What was that about? After the 9/11 attacks, Richard Clarke, who was George W. Bush's anti-terrorism czar in his administration, wrote this book, Against All Enemies, about what happened prior to 9/11, the pre-9/11 intelligence, against all enemies inside America's war on terror. And again, Richard Clarke was the anti-terrorism czar, the terrorism czar. And he writes in this book how in the months before 9/11, between January 20th, when George Bush is sworn in, and September 11th, what is that? 8 months later, between that time, Richard Clarke says that he went to Condoleezza Rice, whose Condoleezza Rice was the national security. Now, this is her title at this time, National Security Advisor. This is her job, national security. So in those months, 8 months between Bush being sworn in January of 2001 and September 11th of 2001, Richard Clarke says that he tried over and over and over again to get a meeting with George Bush to talk to him about the terrorists that were in the country that were getting ready to stage a terrorist attack. And you can see the jacket of the book. You can see on the cover of the book, he's got pictures of. He's got pictures of George H.W. Bush. He's got a picture of George W. Bush and Bill Clinton, the father and the two sons. He's got pictures on the jacket of the father and the two sons. And it says, Against All Enemies. What is that pertaining to? The title of this book. What is Against All Enemies pertaining to? Well, Against All Enemies pertains to the oath that members of Congress take, to members of the military take this oath. The phrase Against All Enemies, foreign and domestic, appears in the oath of office for U.S. military personnel, federal employees, members of Congress, committing them to defend the Constitution from any threats, whether external or internal. And Joseph McCarthy is saying, no, folks, no. This is not an external threat. This is not the Soviet Union. What's going on is that there is a communist subversion that is internal. It's domestic. It's happening here in the United States. That's why Richard Clarke titled his book Against All Enemies. That it wasn't a foreign threat. 9/11 had nothing to do with foreign threat. The threat is right here. You're sleeping with the enemy, people. You're sleeping with the enemy is what Richard Clarke is trying to tell you with this title. Against all enemies, foreign and domestic. What are domestic threats? What is the meaning of domestic? Domestic, including threats from within the country, such as insurrectionists, sedition, or other actions that could undermine the Constitution or the government. Domestic. One of my favorite stories about Joseph McCarthy, you can see that he died in 1957. And there's this story about when he is at his funeral and all these people were down at the gravesite where they're lowering the casket into the grave, that far off, standing under a tree, there paying his respect to Joseph McCarthy is John Kennedy. That John Kennedy, who was a colleague of Joseph McCarthy, and or was it Bobby Kennedy? It was one of the Kennedy brothers, either John or Bobby, that were standing under this tree far off, paying their respect. But John Kennedy was a colleague. He was a Democrat colleague and with McCarthy. And if you look at what Kennedy is saying after he's elected president, 3 years after McCarthy's death, it seems like Kennedy really understood that the threat was domestic, especially if you look at the speech that he gives that we looked at a couple of podcasts ago. He gives to the press club just 3 months after he's sworn in April of 1961, after the Bay of Pigs fiasco. He had already fired John Dulles and the heads of the CIA, and he's warning the press there, telling him, in a, absolutely surreal speech when you look at it, talking about a global conspiracy, secrets. It's often called his speech on secret societies because he says the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we have long objected to secret proceedings, secret oaths. I mean, to me, it seems like Kennedy understood what was going on just the way Joseph McCarthy understood what was going on. And Prescott Bush organized the censure of Joseph McCarthy. Prescott Bush. Who is Prescott Bush? The controversial rise of Prescott Bush. Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George W. Bush and Bill Clinton, I guess, because Bill Clinton's surrogate father is George H.W. Bush. He was a senator, but he was a banker. He was a banker before he was a senator. So as a senator, is he really thinking about the United States and what's going to advance the United States and help the United States? Or is he thinking about the bank that he works for, the private investment bank that he works for, Brown Brothers Harriman? After the war, Prescott Bush married Dorothy Walker, daughter of wealthy businessman, enjoyed his father's father-in-law's investment firm. When it merged with the British company, Prescott Bush became a managing partner of the newly created Brown Brothers Harriman. Brown Brothers Harriman was the bank that he worked for. So he's a banker, and then he goes into politics. What's his objective? Like I told you, that Prescott Bush is and Barack Obama's grandfather here, Stanley Dunham. They share common ancestors. It's all family, all bloodline. And I was telling you how in the last podcast, how Prescott Bush was in business with this guy, Fritz Thyssen. Fritz Thyssen was, like I said in the last podcast, the Carnegie of Nazi Germany. That he was a steel and mining industrial figure, again, like Carnegie, very, very wealthy. And as it says here, he was an early supporter and financial backer of the Nazi Party. He was a early supporter and financial backer of the Nazi Party. And if you know, the Nazi Party rose up in the Weimar Republic, as the Weimar Republic was experiencing hyperinflation and all these problems that they were dealing with, and how Bush's grandfather helped Hitler's rise to power. The bank that Prescott Bush worked for, Brown Brothers Harriman, had a subsidiary that was helping fund Fritz Thyssen. While Fritz Thyssen was helping support the Nazi Party in their rise. Now, the Nazi Party in their rise, if you understand, we'll get to him in a moment.
The army was to be increased to 300,000.
Hold on. So I want you to watch this clip. I want you to see this. Because what happened, if you understand that after World War I, when the Germans lost, here it is right here. After the Germans lost, and they placed all these reparations on the Germans that they had to pay. I mean, even John Maynard Keynes, and honestly, I'm not a fan of it. It's funny because people go on and on about the Austrian economists versus Keynesian economists, and Keynesian economists is about it's who the British economist is, John Maynard Keynes, but he was in France during the Treaty of Versailles. This is what I say. It goes way back even before these guys that I'm talking about in the middle part of the 20th century, because it even goes back to Wilson. I mean, Woodrow Wilson was the absolute worst. Woodrow Wilson is the president that really sold this country down the river. He really did. But he's the president of the United States, and goes over, and he's basically, presiding over the Treaty of Versailles as this neutral figure that's helping everybody work out what are going to be the stipulations of the treaty, what reparations are going to be paid, the stipulations of what Germany is going to look like, the dividing all. This is after World War I. World War II comes along later, and that's what I'm saying. John Maynard Keynes, he had the foresight to see that all of these onerous reparations that Wilson was putting on Germany were only going to create a eventual another war. That's why World War II, smart people who know that World War II is just the continuation of World War I. And that's what John Maynard Keynes said was going to happen, that if you put all of these onerous reparations on Germany, they're not going to be able to pay them. They're going to experience, financial troubles, and it's eventually going to lead to another war. And that's exactly what happened. But as the Weimar Republic was failing and experiencing all of this, fiscal issues that led to the rise. It's actually they created the environment. Same thing I'm talking about was going on with the rise of socialism and Marxism in the United States right now, that they created the conditions for the rise, that the conditions were created in Germany for the rise of the Nazi Party. That's what John Maynard Keynes is saying when he's criticizing the reparations that they're putting on Germany at the Treaty of Versailles, that it's only going to lead to more war, that they created the environment, the circumstances for the rise of war. But while that was happening, Bush's grandfather, Prescott Bush, was doing business with Fritz, and Fritz was supporting the Nazi Party in their rise. The Nazi Party, one of the treaties stipulations of the Treaty of Versailles is that that the Nazi Party couldn't build an army anymore. They couldn't have an air force. They couldn't build a military anymore. So Hitler's doing that and keeping it private, I guess. I don't know how you could keep it private with all these American businesses all over Germany. IBM, Coca-Cola, which was Fanta. They bottled Fanta over there, but it's still Coca-Cola was over there. All of these different American corporations that were over in Germany. How is the Nazi Party building this army in secret when they're not supposed to be building an army as in accordance with the Treaty of Versailles? And as they're building this army, this steel industrialist, I'm sure that the Nazis are using his steel to build their army, to build their tanks, to build their planes when they're not supposed to be building a military according to the Treaty of Versailles. And Bush is in business with this guy in the 1930s, Fritz. Bush's grandfather helped Hitler's rise to power.
But in secret, Hitler was also spending lavishly on a huge rearmament program. Under the Versailles Treaty, the German army had been limited to 100,000 men.
The Treaty of Versailles said that the German army could not grow larger. This is what the treaty said. That the German army could not grow larger than 100,000 men. And Hitler is building this major army, and he's getting support from American industrialists, American bankers, American corporations like IBM, Coca-Cola, and there's others. I don't know them all. But as he's doing this, he's building his army beyond what the Treaty of Versailles says that he can do. Not only as far as the foot soldiers, he's not listening to this.
Under the Versailles Treaty, the German army had been limited to 100,000 men. The country was forbidden to have an air force, tanks, or submarines.
The country was forbidden by the Treaty of Versailles from having an air force, from having tanks, from having submarines, all the stuff that Hitler was supposedly building and creating. You know how much industry it takes to build tanks and air force? How's this being done in private? How's Hitler building his army, building his air force, building, all of the artillery and stuff that he needs in private, and nobody knows what's going on and violating the Treaty of Versailles? How is this happening? While Bush's grandfather, who becomes a senator, while he's a banker, is doing business with the steel giant that's supporting and supporting all this
Versailles Treaty. The German
and Prescott Bush becomes a senator, and he didn't know anything. Well, he wasn't a senator back then; he was a banker, but still, he didn't know anything about the fact that he's doing business with the guy who's supporting Hitler, and Hitler's likely using his steel and his industry to build up his army, violating the Treaty of Versailles. Bush didn't know any of that.
But in secret, Hitler was also spending lavishly on a huge rearmament program. Under the Versailles Treaty, the German army had been limited to 100,000 men. The country was forbidden to have an air force, tanks, or submarines. This small army was trebled in size. Then, in 1935, Hitler came out into the open. He unveiled a brand new air force.
Look at this. Look at all these planes. Look at all these planes that just in 1935, Hitler just showed, I got an air force now. Nobody knew I had an air force. Nobody knew that I was building all these planes. Where's the steel coming from to build all these planes? It's coming from Prescott Bush's business partner. That's where it's coming from. So in 1935, Hitler just comes out with all of these weapons, this air force, and boom, I got this army that I'm not supposed to have because of, the treaty that we made in Versailles. I'm not supposed to have all this stuff, but all of a sudden he has it, and we're a force to be reckoned with. And Bush was doing business with the guy whose steel that Hitler was using. Now, at the same time, we're talking about Prescott Bush working in Germany with the Nazis. Prescott Bush working with and financing and being the banker of the guy whose steel is being used to build Hitler's army. While he's doing that, his fraternity brother, this guy, Averell Harriman. Averell Harriman is the founder of the bank Prescott Bush. These guys went to Yale at the same time. Prescott Bush and Averell Harriman were at Yale at the same time. They both were members of Skull and Bones. They both come out of Skull and Bones and out of Yale, and they are banking partners together. They both go into politics as bankers. So they're both bankers for the same bank. And then they both go into politics. Again, the same question I asked about Prescott Bush. When Prescott Bush is in the Senate and he's working as a senator, is his interest his bank, his private investment bank, or is his interest more, the interests of the American people and what he can do to help the American people? No, his interest was his private bank, just like Averell Harriman. Averell Harriman went into politics. Averell Harriman was a banker from Brown Brothers Harriman. When Averell Harriman went into politics, was his interest, was his vision to help the American people, help the United States? No. His business, his interest was his bank, just like Prescott Bush, his banking partner. The interesting thing, like I explained in the last podcast, is that Averell Harriman, who was Bush's fraternity brother, Bush's friend, Bush's banking partner for this private bank, Brown Brothers are the oldest and largest private investment bank, private. Let me say, it's not anybody's investing in Brown Brothers Harriman. Brown Brothers Harriman is the oldest and one of the largest private investment banks in the United States. Prescott Bush and Averell Harriman, fraternity brothers at Yale, friends, banking partners at Brown Brothers Harriman. Averell Harriman was a Democrat, Democratic Party. Prescott Bush was a Republican. Prescott Bush, Republican Party. Republican Party, Prescott Bush, Democrat Party, his fraternity brother, Averell Harriman. How's that happen? How's that happen? That these guys go to Yale together, they're fraternity brothers, they're banking partners, but their political differences are of such that one's a Democrat and one's a Republican. Averell Harriman, Democrat, Prescott Bush, Republican. How's that happen? Again, do you really believe that Prescott Bush and Averell Harriman's political differences were so varying? They're both, skull and bones, fraternity brothers. They're both banking partners for the same banks. You really think that they have different political views, that one's a Democrat and one's a Republican? No, people. This is the game. This is what I'm telling you. It's heel hero. Antagonist, protagonist. It's a game that they're playing. They have the same political interest. And it was the political interest that they had was their bank. It was their bank. It was the bank they worked for. Brown Brothers Harriman. So this guy is doing business with the Nazis, and he's a Republican. And like I said, what's his fraternity brother and banking partner doing? What's Averell Harriman doing in politics? You can see here that Averell Harriman actually worked for John F. Kennedy. He was the undersecretary for John F. Kennedy. He was the assistant secretary of state for John F. Kennedy. He was governor of New York. He's a Democrat. Director of Mutual Security Agency is what he did under Truman. He worked for Harry Truman. All Democrats, all these Democrats. He's a Democrat. He's coming from the Democratic side. United States Secretary of Commerce under Truman. United States Ambassador to the United Kingdom under Truman. This is all Averell Harriman. Averell Harriman. United States Ambassador to the Soviet Union under FDR. Under FDR, United States Ambassador to the Soviet Union. Now, I said in the last podcast that at the same time that Prescott Bush, his fraternity brother, was doing business with the Nazis, that Averell Harriman was the ambassador of the Soviet Union. Averell Harriman wasn't the ambassador at the same time that Bush was doing business with the Nazis. The assets from that side of Brown Brothers Harriman had already been seized in 1941, and then 2 years later is when Averell Harriman becomes the ambassador to the Soviet Union, and he's ambassadors from 1943 until the end of the war. The war ends in 1945, and it says here that Averell Harriman is still the ambassador to the Soviet Union a year after World War II ends, until 1946. And what's Averell Harriman doing? He's overseeing lease lead. So one fraternity brother and banking partner is in Russia, is what I'm trying to get you to understand. And working with Russia, Democrat, and then the other one is with the Nazis in Germany, Republican, Prescott Bush. Fraternity brothers, banking partners. And what was Averell Harriman doing when he did become the ambassador to the Soviet Union? He was overseeing the lease lead program, where we were giving all of these arms and food and supplies to the Soviet Union. Averell Harriman was the ambassador that was overseeing that.
I say, old FDR asked Congress if in January of 1941, FDR asked Congress if he could do things a little differently. He wanted the power to lend and or lease weapons to American allies. The act would authorize the president to sell, lend, or rent military hardware to any country deemed vital to national security. This was the Lend-Lease Act. But not everybody was cool with the proposed legislation. Some Americans felt the act would give the president too much power. And there were plenty of isolationists in Congress who didn't want to get involved in that messy war over there in Europe. One of those isolationists was Ohio Senator Robert Taft, a Republican critic of many of Roosevelt's policies. Taft feared the act would, quote, give the president power to carry on a kind of undeclared war all over the world in which America would do everything except actually put soldiers in the frontline trenches where the fighting is.
So let me explain. After World War I, the level of isolation, what they call isolationism, there was no appetite in the United States for the United States joining World War II. I mean, the polling for support for us getting into World War II prior to Pearl Harbor is like in the high 80s of Americans saying, no, we want to have nothing to do with this war. So this was a workaround for FDR before Pearl Harbor happened, that at least, let us, supply some of these countries that are allies, namely France and England. And then it turned into Russia as well, because Russia was an ally. Russia helped us out. Russia was first an ally with the Nazis, with Hitler, and then Hitler, invaded Russia, and then Russia and the Nazis became enemies. And then we got the idea, okay, well, if now Russia and the Nazis are enemies, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So let us support Russia and send all of these arms and food to communist Russia. Russia was a communist country at this point, and we knew that they were communists, but again, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So Germany and Russia are fighting each other now, so let us support Russia. This was the idea around, again, Lend-Lease was namely about supporting Great Britain and France, but it became, let us also support the Soviet Union because they're fighting our enemy in fighting the Nazis. Again, now the Nazis, if Prescott Bush and these other American corporations are supporting the rise of the Nazis, then you can't use the Nazis as this boogeyman for why you got to give all of these arms and supplies to the Soviet Union. Again, playing these different factions off one another is what happened. But let's look a little bit more of this clip, and I'm going to show you exactly what we gave the Soviet Union, communist Russia, under Lend-Lease. And it didn't stop with Lend-Lease. This is what Yuri is talking about when he's saying that Western imperialists, Western corporations are supporting the Soviet Union, propping up the Soviet Union. It didn't stop with Lend-Lease, people.
Taft wasn't wrong. That's exactly what the Lend-Lease Act wanted to accomplish. Congress and the American public still weren't totally on board with going to war. So Lend-Lease was a compromise, a way to fight in World War II without actually fighting. Officially, the U.S. would still be neutral. The bill bounced around Congress for a couple of months before being signed that March. Though Lend-Lease was initially designed to aid Great Britain, it was also used to supply China in April of '41 and the Soviet Union in September. By the war's end, over 36 countries had received help from the U.S. to the tune of billions of dollars.
So that's why he's explaining that it started off being something that was
for 4 years, the Soviet Red Army
for Great Britain, but it ended up we ended up supporting China because China was also fighting the Japanese, but also the Soviet Union. And this is what we gave the Soviet Union. What do you see here? Here you go.
Aggression. After Nazi Germany invaded in 1941, Lend-Lease was extended to the Soviet Union too. In all, about 23% of the total program went to the USSR.
23% is what he says here of Lend-Lease. The total program went to communist Russia.
In all, about 23% of the total program went to the USSR. Between 1942 and 45, massive shipments included 400,000 trucks and jeeps, 14,000 aircraft, 13,000 tanks, and 72,000 radios.
This is only to Russia. This is only what we sent to Russia is what he's laying out. 40,000 trucks and jeeps. This is only to Russia. Listen.
In 45, massive shipments included 400,000 trucks and jeeps, 14,000 aircraft, 13,000 tanks, and 72,000 radio sets. America also sent a staggering 4.5 million tons of food and nearly 3 million tons of petroleum products, as well as millions of rifles, blankets, uniforms, and boots. These critical supplies arrived at key moments. In late 1943, Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin already judged that Lend-Lease had been decisive. Without it, Stalin said, we would have lost the war.
Okay, so Stalin was an ally. At the end of the war, Stalin was an ally. We had supported Russia with all of these arms and food and everything to stabilize them because, they were fighting the Russians and we gave them all. How did they transform into becoming our Cold War enemy all of a sudden at the end of the war after we had been supporting them, and then boom, they become our Cold War enemy? How'd that happen? Who was the first person to mark them as an enemy after the war and during the Cold War, and which started the Cold War? Who's the first person to say, oh, these guys are getting hostile now? These guys are getting hostile now. We got to watch him. After he oversaw Lend-Lease and oversaw all of these shipments of weapons and food and trucks and Jeeps, everything that we sent them to prop them up so they could help us fight the Nazis. The Nazis who his fraternity brother and banking partner were helping to support in their rise. This guy, he identified them and said, that they're getting hostile now. That this is why the Cold War, we're getting ready to start the Cold War. This guy right here. And this is the guy, people, Averell Harriman. He was the mastermind of the Kennedy assassination. He worked for Kennedy, yes, like I just said, but he was undermining Kennedy, and he was the mastermind of the Kennedy assassination. This guy. They tell you it was LBJ and all that stuff. No, it wasn't LBJ. It was this guy, Averell Harriman. And it was because, like I said, I believe it's because Kennedy figured out what they were doing. This antagonist, protagonist role. They were playing heel hero, propping Russia up to be the Cold War enemy so they can build up the industrial complex that Eisenhower warns you about in his farewell address. Think about that. Dwight Eisenhower, General Eisenhower, who was the general that executed World War II when we got into it and became president of the United States, is telling you, beware of the military industrial complex and the rise of the military industrial complex. That only a knowledgeable citizenry can combat, what the military industrial complex is doing. And Kennedy figured it out. I was telling you in the last podcast that the speech that Kennedy gave, this was around June 10th, I believe the date was, 1963. And this is America University, a commencement speech that Kennedy is given. And this is after he had already opened up lines of communications with Khrushchev after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they had started talking with one another. And this is what I believe that Kennedy figured out, that, hey, this is a game that they're playing on us, and we're spending all this money on this military buildup for this Cold War when there really isn't a threat, and we could be using that money to help our own people.
It is an ironic but accurate fact that the two strongest powers are the two in the most danger of devastation. All we have built, all we have worked for, would be destroyed in the first 24 hours. And even in the Cold War, which brings burdens and dangers to so many countries, including this nation's closest allies, our two countries bear the heaviest burdens. For we are both devoting massive sums of money to weapons.
We are both devoting massive sums of money to weapons. That's what Kennedy is saying. We're both devoting massive sums of money to weapons.
Closest allies, our two countries bear the heaviest burdens. For we are both devoting massive sums of money to weapons that could be better devoted to combat ignorance, poverty, and disease. We are both caught up in a vicious and dangerous cycle, with suspicion on one side breeding suspicion on the other, and new weapons begetting counterweapons. In short, both the United States and its allies, and the Soviet Union and its allies, have a mutually deep interest in a just and genuine peace and in halting the arms race. Agreements to this end are in the interests of the Soviet Union as well as ours.
So notice he gives this speech. This is after his brother had opened up lines of communications with Khrushchev to calm down the Cuban Missile Crisis, which they do, work out a deal for Khrushchev to remove the missiles from Cuba. And, they get that, but they open up a line of, then he gives this speech afterwards saying that, look, man, we need to get rid of this Cold War. We're spending all this money on weapons. We need, if you watch this entire speech, he says, listen, we both want the same thing. We both want our families to be strong. We both don't want it's crazy. 5 months later, this guy's dead. 5 months later after he's calling for peace and an end to the Cold War. Because they wanted to use the Cold War to build up their power. That's why they were using this heel, hero, antagonist, protagonist role. So they could build up their power. All right, in the next podcast, we're going to talk about how these people are using racial division to divide us. So we are not paying attention to them looting us and what they are doing and what they've been doing. We're going to get back into that in the next podcast. And I'll be here on Monday with that. And there's going to be a lot to cover. I'm not going to be able to finish everything that I want to talk about in the next podcast. We'll probably be a couple of weeks talking about this intentional racial strife and divide and conquer strategy that they have going on in this country. It's evident to anyone with a brain. But we'll start talking about that on Monday. I hope you guys have a great weekend. I'll see you.